He took office as the popular John Huntsman Jr. left the Utah governorship to serve in the federal government. Now, Gary Herbert must win a special election November 2nd to fill the remaining 2 years left in the term. He's being challenged by popular Salt Lake County Mayor, Democrat Peter Caroon. The mayor wants to make ethics a major theme of the campaign, but must overcome a steep lead in the polls Governor Herbert maintains. KBYU 11 brings you the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce gubernatorial debate. Hello, I'm Wes Sims, News Director of KBYU FM. With me is Professor David Mangleby, founder of Brigham Young University's Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy. David?
It's good to be with you, Wes.
Likewise, David. And we're in the ballroom right now of the Provo Marriott Hotel, where in just a few moments we'll hear a debate between the major party candidates hoping to be Utah's next governor. They've been invited here by the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce, today's debate organizer. David, do you see debates as an opportunity or as a liability for the candidates taking part in them?
Well, they're both, and it depends a little bit on the candidate's position. They're an opportunity because both of these candidates are not as well known as, say, a Mike Leavitt, who has served multiple terms. But there's also the liability question, which is if they make a major mistake that shows they don't really know the job or know the issues, that can become a major liability. We live in a world called YouTube, where these things get replayed over and over again.
Well, we're going to get to the debate shortly, but first some background. The Election 2010 reporter Brittany Glass prepared this background report about the candidates, along with an overview of the issues that they're most passionate about.
Though sitting governor, this is the first time Gary Herbert is the Republican nominee. Born in American Fork, Herbert lived most of his life in Utah. He attended BYU, where he met and married his wife, Jeanette. Together, they have 6 children and a growing number of grandchildren.
Yeah, we got a big family, and I love having a big family. We're all kind of grown up now, and we're just best friends.
After graduating from college, Herbert decided it was time to settle down.
I went into business, in the real estate business, with my father and family members, and in that process came to appreciate the free market and an understanding of what government should do and what it shouldn't do.
Herbert says his outlook changed once again when his business started suffering in the 80s.
And that's where I kind of got more motivated to be more involved than ever before. And as people challenged me, well, why don't you do something? The end result of that challenge was I ran for elected office.
He served on 28 different boards and organizations, including the Utah Association of Realtors and the Utah County Commission. In 2004, he decided to run for governor, but the political landscape changed.
Governor Huntsman, who was just one of the candidates, asked Gary to be his lieutenant governor. And I'm sure it was a tough decision to give up the governor's race to accept the lieutenant governor's position, but he did it.
After serving 5 years as lieutenant governor, Herbert became governor when Huntsman accepted the ambassadorship to China in 2009. Governor Herbert selected State Senator Greg Bell of Fruit Heights as his lieutenant governor and kept him on the ticket for the election this fall. No stranger to public service and politics himself, Salt Lake County Mayor and Democratic nominee for governor, Peter Caroon, comes from the East Coast, but says he loves living and raising his family of 5 in Utah.
We hike together, we play football together, even Sophie helps play football. Play soccer together, so we do a lot of things together.
Described as a scholar at heart, Caroon has degrees in engineering, real estate finance, and law, and he admits.
I was kind of a nerd.
After school, Caroon settled in Utah and started a small family-owned real estate business.
My brother and I, we have a small company where we basically take older buildings and renovate them and try to fix them up and rent them out again.
With business success came greater interest in government. Caroon decided he'd take his chances in local politics. He won the race for Salt Lake County Mayor in 2004 and was re-elected in 2008 with a 2/3 majority.
His job as county mayor and running for governor, I think it fits him perfectly because he just wants to do something better for people and for the community.
This is Caroon's first time campaigning for governor, and with former Republican legislator Cheryl Allen as his running mate, they're making history on a bipartisan gubernatorial ticket.
So we decided, let's come together this year, send the message that this race is going to be about the people of Utah, not about political parties.
With both candidates claiming to be fiscal conservatives, this year's gubernatorial race presents two men with a similar focus on key issues, like creating jobs, promoting improvements in schools and education, and utilizing while protecting Utah's environmental resources. One of the biggest differences between the candidates is in their approach to financing campaigns. Herbert's campaign claims he has an open and transparent administration and assures his decisions are not affected by campaign donors. However, Caroon supports setting voluntary campaign contribution limits and prohibiting state contractors from even donating.
We just need to know that our political leaders aren't being influenced by money.
And the taxpayers are paying attention, especially with recent headlines. The news that UDOT paid out $13 million to the construction bid team that came in second on the I-15 reconstruction project. It's the largest roads project the state's ever seen, worth around $1.7 billion. Provo River constructors got the bid even though they came in second, and records showed that the construction firm donated more than $80,000 to Governor Herbert's campaign, the same month that UDOT awarded them the bid. Governor Herbert's office said that the construction firm's donations to his campaign played no role in the awarding of the I-15 project bid. Brittany, election 2010.
Well, of course, the voters will decide this election, but pollsters see a big advantage for Governor Herbert. Back in August, the Rasmussen organization published the results of a survey showing the governor with a 2-to-1 lead over Mayor Caroon. And just a couple of weeks ago, a poll by Dan Jones and Associates for the Utah Priorities Project found the race had tightened, but maybe not as much as Caroon would have liked. The undecided seem even more undecided now, David.
Right. They're just starting to pay attention. There's a lot going on. The national level has dominated the story. But in many ways, the most important dynamics of this race have happened since both of those polls were done. I really wish we had a poll from this last week to see if this I-15 controversy, just mentioned in the segment we watched, has eroded the support for Governor Herbert. That'll be, I think, Caroon's best chance to have a breakthrough here.
Well, I'm sure we'll hear about that during this debate. What do the candidates have to accomplish in today's debate, David?
Well, I think for Caroon, he needs to continue to keep Gary Herbert on the defensive. What he wants to try to do is make administrative competence an issue. As the mayor of the state's largest county and having served longer in that role than Governor Herbert has as governor, he's trying to position himself as the superior administrator. I think for Herbert, he wants to put that issue behind him and focus on the sort of rock-solid Republican values which are evident in this state with its very strong Republican orientation.
Well, David, Mayor Caroon and Governor Herbert are on stage now here at the Provo Marriott Hotel, the site of the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce gubernatorial debate. The moderator is Quinn Monson, Associate Director of the BYU Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy.
On behalf of the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce, it's my pleasure to welcome Governor Gary Herbert and Salt Lake County Mayor Peter Caroon to this debate. We will begin with 1-minute opening statements from each candidate. A few moments ago, as you saw, we conducted a coin toss to see who would begin first. Governor Herbert will have the first opening statement.
Well, thank you, Quinn. It certainly is an honor for me to be with you here at the Chamber of Commerce and talk about issues that are important to Utah and Utah's future. As most of you know, I took over the leadership of this state here at a very difficult time. Some people think that it's maybe the worst time since the Great Depression. And my challenge was to balance budgets, to protect government services, particularly education, and do it with a loss of about $1 billion in revenue. At the same time, our challenge was to kickstart the economy, to see if we can start creating jobs again here in Utah after a loss of jobs for the last 2 or 3 years. The good news is it's happening. We are doing it. We're not just talking about it. We did balance the budget. We did protect government services, and we did protect education. And since my inauguration, we've created 19,000 jobs. Why is that important? Because that's how you pay the bills. As business people know, you grow the economy, you pay the bills, no matter what your services are. I believe in a better future by building a better economy. Thank you very much for being here today.
Mayor Caroon.
This is a critical time for the state of Utah. We live in a great state, we have great, wonderful people, and it's a great place to do business. But in 2010, we have some serious issues, which frankly, I think many of our state leaders have not been putting their full attention to. We have the 12th worst budget gap of any state in the nation this year. We have the highest unemployment rate in 26 years and rising. We have our unemployment insurance fund is about to go bankrupt. We have the 5th highest bankruptcy rate in the nation. We have 30% more foreclosures in the first 6 months of this year compared to last year. We have the lowest per pupil funding of any state in the nation, and 27% more of our senior citizens who are seeking food stamps just to eat. Things can be so much better, but we need to focus on our jobs and our economy. We need to focus on our education system. We need to focus on our quality of life. I've been the Salt Lake County Mayor since 2005. We focused on honest, ethical, and efficient government, and that's what I want to do as your governor.
Governor Herbert and Mayor Caroon will be answering questions constructed with the advice and input from members of the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce Government Review Council. Time limits for answering these questions will vary based on their complexity. I'll alternate which candidate answers the question first. The first question goes to Mayor Caroon, and then we'll follow with Governor Herbert addressing the same question. First question. What is your view of the role government plays in the economy? What specifically should the state be doing to aid economic growth?
First of all, I think our economic development is primarily created by our local businesses, and we have 70% of our economy in the state of Utah is driven by those local businesses with less than 10 or more employees. But I think government can have a role, and I think in the short term in the state of Utah we should be doing two things. First, I supported an economic development tax cut for any company that's willing to create a new job at a decent paying job. I think government also can help retrain workers who have lost their jobs, or at least support retraining programs where people have lost their jobs. I think those are the two most important things we can do in the short term. Long term, I think we need to have a #1 education system in the state of Utah. Not only for our young people, but for economic development. We will prosper only if we have a strong education system in the state of Utah.
Governor Herbert, 1 minute.
When it comes to growing the economy, the government has a very limited role. And we all know here as business people that jobs and economic expansion comes from the private sector, not from government. And as we empower the private sector, they will become the innovators and creators of new products, new services. They'll build the new widgets. They'll find the better mousetrap. That's happened since the beginning of our country. It's happening here in Utah today. We believe in lower taxes and limited government and an empowerment of the private sector. The reason we're growing better in this state as opposed to what's happening across the country, remember this is supposed to be the summer of recovery with the Obama administration, the Democrats. It hasn't happened. But it's happening in Utah because we understand keeping government off your backs and out of your wallets. We do have a lower tax rate here than around the country. We have a higher unemployment, but it's 2% lower than the national levels. We were just coming out of the Great Recession, so-called, and Utah's leading the nation out of that Great Recession by creating jobs and economic expansion. Our private sector is doing extremely well, and we're here to help facilitate, not to hinder.
Let me ask a follow-up for both of you. What about incentives that state and local government often provide to entice businesses to move their operations to the state of Utah? Are these tax breaks really fair? In other words, don't these tax breaks just shift the tax burden away from the new businesses to existing businesses? 30 seconds each. Mayor Caroon.
Well, I think this is an area where I do differ from Gary Herbert. I think under the current administration, it's been the only economic tool to try to create new business in the state. And I'm concerned that we are giving money to out-of-state businesses and foreign companies at the expense of our local businesses. And so I think it's sometimes important to have incentives, but they should be short-term and they should be limited. And then we should treat all of our companies equally for creating new jobs in the state of Utah.
This is an area that I think respectfully, Mayor Kroon does not understand the incentive program. The incentive program we have is not a bucket of money we give to people. It's if you come to our state and create new jobs, new economic expansion, create new income tax, we'll give some of it to you back as a post-performance. It's worked extremely well. Adobe just came. They're going to create 1,000 jobs, probably $2.5 billion of economic expansion in our state. That income tax all goes into funding education. The proof is in the pudding. We are actually growing jobs in Utah for the first time in 3 years, so whatever program we're doing is working.
Let's have one more follow-up on the economy. Let me ask you to describe in detail any steps that you have taken or additional steps that might be taken in the future to strengthen the housing market. First, Mayor Kroon.
Well, one of the issues we've had, obviously, is significant number of foreclosures. As I mentioned, we have 30% more foreclosures than we did last year. I think one of the things we can do as a government is, first of all, help first-time home buyers get into homes. And then where we have significant foreclosures, what we've done in Salt Lake County, which has worked well, is buy up older homes, fix them up, and then put them back out into the market, and then take that money and use it again to recycle homes, fix them up back into the market.
As we all know, there has certainly been a downturn in the economy, and that certainly is reflected in foreclosures. The Obama administration's proposal for subprime mortgages has been an incentive to people to get into homes that they could not, in fact, afford, and we're seeing the ramifications of government involvement, unfortunately, in the marketplace. Salt Lake County has the same foreclosure rate that we have across the state. Some areas are worse than others. Utah's Dixie. The best thing we can do for people involved in purchasing homes, retaining homes, is to grow the economy, provide jobs and opportunities, and get the government out of the way so that the private sector can function.
Let's move to a new topic now. We've heard a lot of discussion so far in this campaign about ethics and campaign finance. First, is there a need for campaign finance legislation that would limit contributions to state political candidates? If so, why and what would be an appropriate limit? And if not, why not? Let's go 1 minute each, and we go first on this one to Governor Herbert.
You know, I think campaign finance reform is a healthy debate. I think we ought to have it. It's too bad that we haven't had it heretofore. I think it's important that we look at ethics. Ethics reform is something that I called for in my State of the State address, and the legislature responded. We passed 6 bills that have to do with ethics and campaign finance reform, all the way from more disclosure, from what you can do with campaign money as far as personal use, to setting up an independent legislative ethics commission, to disclosure of those who get gifts. We've eliminated the jazz tickets and the golf outings that have taken place in the past. So we're doing a significant amount of ethics reform. When we talk about, campaign limitations, we need to talk about, is it right? Is it a free speech issue? How does it fit with the idea of people self-funding? There's some practical applications. Does it matter whether we have a large donor or a lot of smaller donors giving money, like the labor unions that contribute to Mayor Kroon? $150,000 of labor union money, all special interest, the largest donation of special interest in the campaign. That's part of the discussion also. Not that he shouldn't do it, but something we ought to talk about.
Well, I believe in campaign finance reform, and I think this is another area where we do differ. Campaign finance reform is not just about jazz tickets. It's also about companies who do business with the state of Utah giving big contributions. I think we should have campaign finance limits. I think we should prohibit contractors who do business with the state from giving big contributions. In Salt Lake County, when I got into office, I put them in place. I lived under those rules. They work well. Unfortunately, in the state now, we're seeing the effects of not having those. We're seeing contractors who are having visits in the governor's office, giving big campaign contributions, and then contracts. The system is corrupt and needs to change. That's the bottom line. If the citizens don't have faith in their government, that their government is not being influenced by big money, that's a mistake, and we need to change the system.
Let me ask a follow-up on this topic. You both are elected officials. You both accept political contributions. How can political donations be accepted in a way that avoids the appearance of impropriety? How can you reassure citizens that nothing improper is going on? 30 seconds. Governor Herbert.
Well, I've offered and have done, I'm the first elected official to do this, to put all of my donations within 48 hours on the web. People know where all of my money comes from. I think openness and transparency is the key thing. I'm not necessarily into saying you cannot support at some level. The Supreme Court has said money equals speech. And for us to stifle somebody's ability to support a campaign, I think is going in the wrong direction. Mayor Kroon would like to have taxpayer-funded elections. Okay, let's have the discussion. I think that's the wrong way to go. I don't think we want to burden the taxpayers with having to fund elections too. And I don't want just the rich and famous to be able to compete.
Well, if taxpayer-elected funded elections are bad, the only thing worse is having our government which is affected by big contributions. And that's what we need to change. It costs a lot more for bad government than any other kind of system. And I think that's what we're in the midst of right now, and we need to change it. In Salt Lake County, we changed the rules. It works, and it does make a difference. Big money does stifle free speech for the rest of the citizens, and that's why I want to see the system changed.
Let me ask one more follow-up on this topic. Should Utah follow the new standard in federal elections set by the U.S. Supreme Court in the Citizens United case that treats corporations and unions as if they were individuals for campaign purposes? Or should state law restrict donations to only be from individual donors? Governor Herbert, 15 seconds.
Well, I think corporations are a voice of a collective group of people, as are PACs. Again, I'm not into stifling anybody's voice and their ability to contribute to anybody's campaign election. I think that's important, that everybody has an opportunity to have a voice. And I think openness and transparency is the important aspect of this.
Personally, I would like to see contributions limited to citizens, but if that's not going to happen, I think we should limit the amount of money that corporations and political action committees can be giving to candidates, because I think at the end of the day, big contributions from big corporations or big PACs will limit free speech of citizens.
Governor wants another few seconds.
And give Peter a chance to respond too.
Okay.
I think all of us understand politics. We've restricted contributions to $2,300 on federal elections. Does anybody here believe that somehow that's taken money out of it? We have independent expenditures. We have people that now are involved in negative advertising, negative campaign. We don't know where the money comes from. Limiting people's ability to contribute to $2,300 has certainly not helped the federal election process.
Okay, well, if we're not going to do that, then let's at least limit the amount of money that can be given by corporations and political action committees and unions to individual candidates. That way the money's coming directly to the candidates, but it is limited and will reduce the amount of money that's influencing our political system.
Mayor Kroon, very quickly, what is the dollar amount that you would limit it to?
I think $10,000 is a number that's been put out there for a statewide race. I would be comfortable with that.
All right. Let's move to education for a moment. Utah usually ranks lowest on per-child spending on education, and yet we spend a relatively large proportion of our state budget on education. What's the most important way we can create higher quality education with this limited funding? And this one first goes to Mayor Kroon.
First of all, Utah is the lowest in per-pupil funding. The next state higher than us is Idaho, which is 20% higher than us. And we also have been reducing our effort towards education over the last several decades. In the 90s, we used to be number 7 in terms of how much of our income went to education. Now we're number 41. So while we put a lot of money into our education system, our priorities have changed, and I think we need to change our priorities back to make our education system number 1. It means looking at our tax structure. It doesn't mean raising taxes, but it means looking at how we fund education and making sure that we have a stable source of funding for our education system. The state of Utah doesn't have an education funding plan. We've got the Band-Aid plan right now, and I think we need a long-term 10-year plan just like we have for our transportation system. We need to know how we're going to fund the continued growth, and we have 24,000 new students coming into our public and higher education system this year, and our education budget was cut again.
Governor Herbert.
Well, as anybody who read my State of the State address, and I recommend it to Mr. Kroon to read it for good late-night reading, my priorities was grow the economy and work with education. They go hand in hand. We can fund education better by growing the economy. That's what Governor Huntsman and I did. We gave the largest amount of money ever in the history of the world to Utah education because we had a healthy economy that was growing. We gave the largest increase for teacher salaries because we had a healthy economy that was growing. So that's how you pay for education, and that's what we're trying to do. That's why we're focused laser-like on growing the economy. Nobody is interested in the status quo. We know we're the lowest per pupil spending. That goes without saying. We have the largest birth rate and the highest household children per household in the nation, about 25% more. That's why I've brought together, though, I'm not just talking about it, I'm doing something. I'm bringing the Education Excellence Committee, stakeholders from all parts of the education experience, working together, seeing if we can find solutions to the unique Utah challenge, and in fact we are finding solutions, and we're moving ahead in a very proactive fashion now, better than ever time in our history.
Let me ask a follow-up, this one for 30 seconds. In what form, if any, are vouchers for private schools acceptable to you? Mayor Caroon.
I am not a supporter of vouchers. I think we need to make sure our current public and charter school system is funded before we start taking money out of our education system to put towards private institutions. I think children who should have the ability to have choice in education, but I think we need to focus as government on the system we have and fund that before we give it away to private schools. And that's where Gary Herbert was the cheerleader in that effort, and I think it's critical that we fund what we have before we go elsewhere.
Governor.
Well, the Carson Smith Special Needs Fund is a voucher program that everybody applauds and says it's worked very well. The attempt to have a voucher program that expanded was just a takeoff of that effort to infuse more private money into the education system to help with a voucher system to incentivize private money and going into private schools. It's not a matter of the money, it's the delivery system as we're talking about, and everybody doesn't function the same way. Private schools sometimes are better than or public and charter schools. That being said, the public has spoken. I think the voucher issue is over, certainly for the next decade. Again, UAA knows I'm a friend. That's why they've endorsed my candidacy for governor.
Just a note, I've been endorsed as well by the Utah Education Association.
Okay.
I appreciate that, but it is unusual that they endorse the Republican. But it shows that they know that I'm not their enemy, that I'm actually, in fact, fostering public education in this state.
Let me cut in with another follow-up. I'm going to throw you a bit of a curveball here. In recent months, we witnessed a unique spectacle where government officials in China came under heavy criticism from Chinese citizens after an earthquake caused the collapse of poorly constructed school buildings. Well, we live on a fault. What should be done to ensure the safety of Utah school children in an earthquake, especially those who attend schools built before building codes were upgraded? Let's give you 30 seconds. Mayor Caroon first.
Well, they say elections are won in a landslide and lost in an earthquake, so I think it's critical that we make sure that as government officials we do our best to ensure our schools are safe schools. One of the issues we've seen is improper school funding over the last several years. And I think we need to make sure, again, we have a stable funding source for our schools for their construction. But we don't have that, and I think it's imperative on all of us to make sure we have safe schools for all of our students.
Two-thirds of our state budget goes into education, so our effort is there. Can we do better? We can, and we're going to be doing better. But don't minimize the fact that we're putting a significant effort into public education. When it comes to the natural disaster potential problem on the Wasatch Fault, when I was lieutenant governor, I started a program called Be Ready Utah. Be Ready Utah is now a template for what's being looked at nationally. And we have Be Ready Utah for our individuals and families, we have Be Ready Utah for our businesses, and we have Be Ready Utah for our schools. So we actually have in place a plan to make sure that we minimize any kind of natural disaster that would occur because of a program I started that's been implemented and working very well.
Let's shift to taxes now. Unlike the federal government, Utah state government does not deficit spend. Is there a scenario, however, in which tax revenues fall so much that you would agree to raise taxes? If so, what are those circumstances and what taxes would you raise? If not, please identify the category in the state budget that would be your first target for budget cuts. 1 minute for each of you. Let's start with Governor Herbert.
Well, I believe it's absolutely bad economics to raise a tax during a bad economic time. And it's not just a Republican issue. JFK had the same thing when he was president of the United States. We ought to be, in fact, if anything, cutting taxes. I took over when we lost $1 billion in revenue, and we certainly needed the money. But our watchword was we will do more with less. We've cut about 20 to 23% out of most every department. The only places we've protected have been education, and we put more money into transportation to build our infrastructure, which has an economic benefit long term. So we have not, and I have not proposed, and I did not support any tax increases in this past session, and yet still balanced the budget, protected the government services,
doing more with less, looking at more technology. We've just been recognized as one of the best managed states again because of our technology. We have over 900 of our services now online. We're very efficient. And so there's no need for us to, in fact, to raise taxes. We'll become more efficient in providing the services, doing more with less. That's what we've done on my watch.
I would have to say I disagree to a certain extent, in that Utah this year had the 12th worst budget gap in the nation, meaning that it's spending more than it's taking in. Federal money and one-time money was used to balance the budget, but we're going to see the same issue again in next year's budget. In Salt Lake County, we took the hard stance and we balanced our budget for 2010, and we're going to balance it for 2011 without deficit spending. We did it using a scalpel-like approach, going through and each division going through and making sure that we cut out middle management but did not cut significant services. You can't cut your way to economic prosperity, and you can't tax your way to economic prosperity. Salt Lake County has not raised overall property taxes in 10 years, except for judgment levies and voter-approved initiatives. So we've shown that you can keep and expand services without raising budgets.
Let me give you a hypothetical situation, perhaps unrealistic, but I'll give it anyway. Let's assume that given current state tax rates and current levels of spending for education, you are given a choice between cutting the education budget or raising taxes. These are your only two choices. What would you choose? 15 seconds, Governor Herbert.
Well, that's why you don't answer hypotheticals, because they don't always make any sense. We were able to protect education funding that was facing a $400 million cut. And we ended up getting a $10 million nick at the very end on non-essential issues. But we protected public education funding, and we didn't raise taxes. So I think you can do both. Again, it's a devil's choice, but I would work to do both, not raise taxes because it would hurt the economy, hurt education long term, and protect education funding, both.
Mayor Caroon?
And I think the state did not do exactly what you said. It cut $10 million out of our K-12, cut about 17% out of our higher education system, while we have 24,000 new students coming into that system. So the budget was cut, and our students are being hurt because of it. Again, I've always said I will not raise taxes before making sure we cut as much as we could and look for inefficiencies. So that's where I would start before ever considering raising taxes. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure our young students are educated. That's the most important thing we can do, or we're going to lose a generation of students.
Let's talk about health care for a moment. The recently passed federal health reform bill, the Affordable Care Act, will require Utah to expand Medicaid eligibility in 2014 so that Utah's Medicaid population will more than double in size. How do you envision funding Utah's Medicaid obligation when this provision begins in 2014? We go first to Mayor Caroon.
It ain't going to be easy, and frankly, this is one of the areas of concern I have with the new health care bill, is the effect on the states and the Medicaid funding. I think there's some good things in it, like reducing pre-existing conditions and those things that have hurt our entrepreneurs who want to start businesses. But I do have some concerns with Medicaid funding. One of the things that came out this year in an audit from the state, the Department of Workforce Services, the Medicaid eligibility was moved from the Department of Health to Department of Workforce Services. It's costing us an extra $28 million now. So I think we have to look, first of all, at where we can have efficiencies, and then also look for duplication and fraud. I mean, we've seen some things in the news over the last few days about Medicaid fraud, and I think we need to be very forceful on preventing that abuse and preventing duplication of services, and that's how we can help fund the new Medicaid costs that are coming forth.
Governor Herbert.
Well, along that line, as you all know, I started the Bangerter Commission, which is some of the best minds in Utah spend a year reviewing our state government and our efficiencies. The review and the report was Utah is a very well-managed state, that the taxpayers' dollars are being used very wisely and judiciously. That being said, there's room for improvement. They give us about 56 different areas of improvement, which we're going to try to incorporate over the next couple of years. National health care, though, which is the issue, has been a debacle. This is where the Democrats have really gotten it wrong. This entitlement society that they're creating, which is impacting states because it's an unfunded mandate, is incredible. Do you know that the states and the governors were never invited to the table for that discussion by this administration? I find that unconscionable. States should be, in fact, at least a partner, if not taking the lead. And Utah is doing a good job on health care. We have done, for the last 3 years, working for our own state solution, opening up a health care exchange window, introducing private competition, and helping our small businesses have predictability on their costs for insurance. We're doing it as a state. I wish the Washington, D.C. would let us all do it as states.
Let's shift over and talk about public lands. The federal government is a major property owner in Utah, but they do not pay taxes. What can be done to ensure more revenue is garnered from our federal lands? Let's give you 1 minute each on this. Starting with Governor Herbert.
Well, one of the reasons I put together the Balanced Resource Council, headed up by Ted Wilson, one of our leading environmentalists here in the state of Utah, was to in fact make sure that we can interface on public lands and develop our natural resources and our energy opportunities. We have done something in the last year on public lands that's never been done before. We've actually brought the environmental groups and industry together to negotiate agreement on how the development's going to go forward and occur. We've eliminated litigation. And in the West Tavaputs, for example, with Bill Barrett, what's taking place there is probably $1.5 billion of capitalization with drilling 600 wells that will produce, again, economic development, income tax, which goes to fund education. It's key that in a state like us where we have 75% of our state that is not private land and we don't get property taxes off of it, to have the multiple use aspects of the BLM and other public lands that we have here in the state of Utah. We're, again, not talking about it, we're doing it, and the results are significant.
Mayor Corinne?
I think it's really a balanced approach. As the state continues to grow, we need to be good stewards of our land, our air, and our water quality. At the same time, we do need our natural resources to survive as well. I don't think we can have economic development without being good stewards of our land, but at the same time, we need to use those lands. And so I would support that balanced approach, allowing access where needed, but we also have a big tourism industry that's important to the state, so we need to protect that industry, and then we need to protect, again, our air and water quality.
Let me move to a follow-up, 30 seconds. What can be done to improve the payments the state receives from the Payment in Lieu of Taxes, or PILT program from the federal government? Let's start with Governor Herbert.
Well, that's a federal issue, and again, they sometimes approve it but don't appropriate the money. I've actually testified in behalf of PILT payments and saying that if you're going to have these as public lands, the public ought to be paying for them. And the public isn't. We're getting like 10 cents on the dollar of what we'd be getting on a property tax. So it does put us in a very difficult situation. And if you look at per pupil funding and education, you'll find that those public land states that we have here, mostly in the West, are the ones most affected. So it does have a significant impact. It's a double whammy. We have larger families and we have a lot of public land, which makes it more difficult to fund public education.
Mayor Krim.
I think we're mostly on agreement with that issue, where we need to bring the big bat and go back to our federal government and say, you own a lot of these federal lands. If you're not going to allow us to use it for economic development purposes, then help us out with the payment in lieu of taxes to help us fund our schools, to help us fund our roads, education system, whatever it might be.
Let me follow that up with another question on lands. What's your position on designating federal lands in Utah's wilderness? If you favor more wilderness, how many acres would be designated? If not, what steps should be taken, if any, to protect public land from development? Again, on this topic, we're starting with Governor Herbert. 30 seconds.
Well, again, one of the reasons we have a Balanced Resource Council and our Public Lands Coordination Council is to discuss those issues. There is no number that's the right number. What we're doing right now is going county by county and going through and saying we agree on this as wilderness, this we don't agree as wilderness, and some we're going to have to negotiate out. The Washington County Lands Bill, which we fostered, proved to be a great template of how we can do that and bring people together. It involves some compromise and some rational discussion. We need to do that in all 29 counties, and at the end of the time, we'll total up and say, well, guess what? It's 4.7 million acres of wilderness in the state of Utah.
I believe that in certain circumstances, as Gary Herbert said, let's come together as the economic development or business community who wants to use the lands, the environmental community come together with a responsible solution. In Salt Lake County, we've been working on the issue to develop some wilderness area to preserve our water quality as we continue to grow. But what I don't support is wasting millions of dollars threatening to condemn federal lands, which is not going to get us anywhere but big lawsuits, and that's what our current state leaders are looking at doing.
Well, that's not true. We're not spending any millions of dollars. The issue you're talking about, if we go to court, if in fact it happens, we've taken a pro bono, be used by private attorneys through the Attorney General's office. Secondly, we have school trust lands that are landlocked. We have a need to make sure if we can't negotiate, to litigate so we can have access to it, again, to protect the schools and the education system. So what you said is just not true, Peter.
Well, you know, again, I think we need to be working as partners to gain access where necessary, but not, you know, threatening and wasting millions of dollars. You know, if somebody else wants to donate money to litigate, that's fine, but we're going to end up in a bigger mess by going down that route.
We're doing exactly what you said. Ken Salazar, a Democrat, Secretary of Interior, says what we're doing in Utah is a model for the rest of the country. We're going forward in a very positive, inclusive fashion. He likes what we're doing. Bob Abbey from the BLM likes what we're doing. We're doing it correctly.
I want to invite each of you to take up to 30 seconds and pose a question to each other. The subject is wide open, but please keep the question to one topic. We'll start with a 30-second question and then allow up to 1 minute for an answer. Then we'll go to the other for a 30-second question and up to a 1 minute answer. And I think we are starting this time with Mayor Caroon.
It's a tough one. I guess really the first thing that popped into my mind goes back to what we've seen over the last several weeks with the issue with the $13 million paid out to a company who didn't or isn't performing a contract for the state of Utah and the road work here in Utah County. Can you explain what you knew about that issue beforehand and why you authorized or the Utah Department of Transportation authorized $13 million to go towards a company that's not doing any business for the state of Utah?
You're asking a question, I can give you the answer. The question is going to be whether you want the answer, or whether you're looking for the truth or you're just looking for some political points. The UDOT issue was followed exactly by the law, and the settlement that took place by UDOT and John Nord is done according to the law. In efforts to save taxpayers' money, they awarded the right bid to the right people in the settlement that they've done. Just to kind of show the truth here, Mayor Caroon has been invited multiple times to come to UDOT and to have this explanation given to him. He's refused. It tells a lot about his unwillingness to go there and have them walk through the process and explain it to him. So he's got his own question answered. Right. That being said, the issue really is about campaign donations. We've talked about that a little earlier. I think it is just a little bit disingenuous. You take $150,000 from labor unions. You've got a couple $100,000 from developers that work with Salt Lake County. You've got people that are working with you on your campaign and receiving donations. I don't impugn your integrity about that. I think it's something that we ought to have a debate on campaign disclosure, on campaign donation limitations, but don't impugn my character or the character of hundreds of good state employees, many good business people, by making false accusations about what we're doing here in the state of Utah.
Let me have Governor Herbert ask his question, and then we'll give Mayor Caroon time to answer, and then if there's still time, we'll go back and forth for a moment.
Where to start? I guess the question I would have for Mayor Caroon is, Utah, by all measurable accounts, seems to be doing very well. We're coming out of the economic downturn. We're improving the job situation. We're considered one of the best managed states in America. We're considered one of the #1 best quality of life in America. We're considered the fiscally fittest state in America by Steve Forbes and Forbes magazine. Inc. magazine just said that the epicenter for small business growth and creation, the 500 fastest growing small businesses here in Utah. We lead the nation in SBA loans. There is a lot of positive things going on here in the state of Utah. Why is it all you can see is the negative side? Why is it if I gave you a dozen donuts, it looks like to me all you would see would be the whole, Peter?
I probably would have eaten the whole box of donuts first, knowing myself. But I see great people in the state, and I see a great business climate. But frankly, I think you're missing what's really going on. Magazine ratings don't tell the story of what's going on in our communities, where we have 27% more of our senior citizens who are seeking food stamps just to eat, where we see 30% more foreclosures than we saw last year. There are people suffering in these communities, and frankly, I don't see a lot being done to help the people in those communities.
Little rebuttal. We have a moment to go back and forth. I think you each had more to say on the earlier question as well.
Well, first of all, I'm not questioning your integrity. This issue is not about UDOT, although there's certainly some questions to be answered there about the $13 million, but I'm not impugning anybody's integrity, but I am questioning your leadership and judgment in having people in your office taking big contributions and then having them get big contracts. I just think that system needs to change. And again, I think you're a good man, Gary, but I think you're doing the wrong thing on this issue.
Well, I think you're a good man too, Peter, and I appreciate that. Again, I think it's a little disingenuous, though. You've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars putting advertisements out on the television. You've created a research paper that says, Gary Herbert, governor for sale. You've not made that as a question, or let's talk about campaign finance. You've made it a declaratory statement. And for you to say and stand here and say, I'm not impugning your integrity, no, you're only accusing me of committing a felony. 15 businesses are playing by the rules. Some that are supporters of yours. You've got 600 people at UDOT that do through a very exhaustive independent report to determine who gets the bid, and yet you end up making these accusations which are just fallacious and just with wanton disregard for people's reputations. I think that's disappointing.
Gary, I've read the documents about UDOT. The real issue is, why are you having people in your office doing campaign business when that's not legal?
We don't have anybody in our office doing campaign business. That's false. You're referring to an email or two. Again, emails. Again, one email was you quote was unsolicited, just sent in. You've had some problems with your own emails. I mean, you've had people in your own department that have sent out emails in a campaign format, inviting them to come to different. It is true. Geraldine Dreyfus has sent it out. You've apologized for it. You've had Jim Braden that sent out this attack on all the negative ads regarding me on computer and on county time. Again, you've pulled it back, I understand, but I'm not impugning your character about that. Emails sometimes happen. Zealous supporters of our campaign sometimes do things inappropriately.
I need to allow
this
Mayor Carun
is a little bit beyond the pale
to respond, and then we got to move to closing statements.
I think it's gone beyond that in your office, and I think it needs to change. We need campaign finance reform. If we do that, these issues won't even arise, and then the questions won't be asked. The red flags won't be asked.
They will be raised, because you've got one that gave you $2,500. You said $10,000 is okay, and still you impugn Steve Peterson's character up in Ogden.
I'm not impugning anybody's character.
I opened this can of worms, and I'm going to have to close it. All right. We've reached the time for 1-minute closing statement from each candidate. During the coin toss held before the debate began, it was determined that Mayor Carun will speak last. Governor Herbert, your closing statement, please. 1 minute.
Well, listen, I thank you. It's an honor to be here with you all today and talk about important issues. I think this has been a good, healthy debate on issues, and it's about time. I think you'll see one of the differences between myself and my esteemed opponent is, in fact, that I look at Utah as a glass that's half full, or mostly full. He looks at Utah as a glass that's mostly empty. The negativity that's been brought about in this campaign is really incredible. And everything he looks at, every issue is kind of turned and distorted and made a negative phrase. I don't think that's what we want. I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic in Utah. Things are hopeful. There are good things happening. We're growing the economy. 19,000 jobs just increased since I took office. Internal growth. We've got businesses moving from outside of our state and our borders because we're recognized as a very fertile field for business. One of the best places in America to do business. In every measurable area, we're finding that Utah is the gold standard by people outside that aren't running for governor, that have no axe to grind. I'm here to tell you the people of Utah deserve a governor who believes in them, their people, and the future of Utah. And I'm that guy. I believe in Utah's future, its people. And I would ask for your support. Thank you very much.
Mayor Carun. Mayor Carun, your closing statement, 1 minute.
And when I see the people of Utah and I see the business community in Utah, I see a glass that is completely full. But when I see our leadership, I see a glass that is half empty. I think there is a clear difference. There's a clear choice for the voters this year. I believe in a stronger education system with stable funding. I believe in fiscally conservative government that is efficient and effective and honest. I believe in all our businesses, big or small, in our community. And I believe in campaign finance reform, which I think is an important issue for the citizens of Utah. I've chosen to work with Cheryl Allen, a lifelong educator, somebody who's been a 16-year representative in the legislature as a Republican. Together, she and I want to bring a better future for Utah. Frankly, I think we've been stuck in neutral waiting for Governor Huntsman's replacement. She and I want to bring that leadership to make sure we are moving forward once again.
Gentlemen, our sincere thanks for participating in this debate. Please accept our wishes for your success in the future, and thank you to the Utah Valley Chamber of Commerce for their sponsorship of this important political event. I invite the audience again to applaud the candidates and the Chamber for their efforts. Thank you. Thank you for coming today.
You've been watching Governor Gary Herbert debate his opponent, Salt Lake County Mayor Peter Caroon, in the race to win the Utah governorship on November 2nd. This will be a special election to find out whether voters want Governor Herbert to continue in the office he ascended to as lieutenant governor when Governor John Huntsman Jr. resigned to become U.S. ambassador to China. It's a 2-year term, the remainder of Governor Huntsman's term. David Magleby, founder of BYU Center for the Study of Elections and Democracy, watched the debate with me here at the Marriott Hotel. David, can we declare a winner of this debate?
Well, the social psychologists have a term called selective perception, which is that you see what you want to see, Wes. I think Republicans got plenty of ammunition to feel like their guy, Gary Herbert, is favored, and Democrats feel that their guy, Peter Caroon, is favored. There are far more Republicans than Democrats in Utah. I think Herbert will remain in the lead. What was interesting, I think, is that this issue of the I-15 contract is not going away, and Governor Herbert's response to that question was to take the offense rather than play defense and try and point the finger back at Mayor Caroon. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out in the next few weeks.
Let's talk about some polls. In June, David, your center did some polling among Republicans, and they found out that 3/4 of them supported efforts to limit campaign contributions to state legislative races. What do you make of that data and of the Caroon campaign's focus on campaign funding ethics in the gubernatorial race?
Well, I think it's an issue that works for Peter Caroon. It is something that the public sees as important, and it is something that's intuitive. It just doesn't look or feel or smell right what happened with this I-15 contract, and an explanation really hasn't been given about why $13 million was given to the losing contractor. And so that's why this issue hasn't gone away, and I think if we were doing polling on it today, we would find that that issue is very much one that the public's worried about.
That issue didn't really come up until the end of the campaign, but it's the one that has been in the headlines. It's been talked about in the other 2 debates that the 2 have been held.
Well, it's partly because it's the appearance of corruption. I don't think Governor Herbert's corrupt. I don't think the people at UDOT were corrupt. There are a lot of unanswered questions. Apparently you have to go over to UDOT to find the answers, however. They are not going to tell them to us through other means. And so those unanswered questions mean it lingers. But the Supreme Court, to correct something that Governor Herbert said which was inaccurate, the Supreme Court has said that you can limit contributions. And the reason they said you can limit contributions is it is the appearance of corruption. It may not be corruption itself, but it looks like it might be corrupting. If you've met in the governor's office and a contract ensues, that looks like it could be corruption. And that's the challenge that the governor faces in this issue.
Well, some people have called that issue the gift that keeps on giving for Peter Caroon. Does it have enough legs to carry him over his deficit in the polls, do you think?
I think we don't know. One of the problems for the Herbert people is managing this issue. It's generated 2nd and 3rd level stories, including the one in the newspapers more recently about the owner of the company that got the bid having had an ongoing affair with a female UDOT employee. That looks like corruption. So it's not only the relationship with the governor, it's the relationship now with UDOT and employees that has created a story that keeps on creating tension here.
The governor made the point that Gary Herbert sees the glass as half full and he sees it as half empty, and he sees it as full. Of course, anyone who is in the incumbent position, as Gary Herbert is, wants to take the high road, that things are fine under my administration and we don't need someone in replacing me. So is this an argument that works?
Well, it's very interesting that it's being raised this way in Utah, because across the country, Wes, incumbents are in trouble. Bob Bennett lost. Others, like Murkowski in Alaska, has lost within their own party. As we're going into the general election, the widely shared view is that Democrats will suffer major losses, incumbents will be defeated, Republicans will win in challenger settings, and therefore that wind is at the back of Peter Caroon here. And the governor has a bit of a challenge. It's interesting to see the extent to which he manages that. Is he an incumbent or is he not quite an incumbent, having not been elected? He owns the Huntsman-Herbert legacy, but he hasn't yet been elected governor himself.
There is another dichotomy regarding the economy, because Republicans want to paint the Obama economic proposals as a failure, but the governor wants to say, well, despite that, we're doing really well in Utah. Can you have it both ways?
Well, I initially started making a little note of how many times the governor was going to mention that name Obama, which I thought he might use more often. He only mentioned it twice. I thought he might actually end up using it more and more, as if he were running against Obama rather than Caroon. The reality is the stimulus money has had marginal effects in Utah, as it has around the country. The real issue with the stimulus money is what's going to happen to those teacher jobs and those other public employee jobs, including highway construction, if the stimulus money goes away. Then we could have the challenge of a double-dip recession. So we're not out of this yet, and I think that economic debate is going to be important, not just in this election, but in the next coming years.
Well, this was a good debate, a very civil debate for most of it, until it got a little fiery at the end, and they were questioning each other.
Yes.
And this is the only gubernatorial debate we'll bring you, but we have others. Each Friday this month, KBYU 11 brings you election programming. It'll be Fridays at 8 p.m. Next week, you can hear candidates in the 1st and 3rd congressional district races. On October 15th, the candidates to become Utah's next junior senator will debate. Then on October 22nd, tune in for a discussion of issues Utah voters face as they head to the voting booth. Finally, on October 29th, right before election week, we'll hear interviews with the candidates in Utah's 2nd congressional district race. I'm Wes Sims, along with David Magleby. We'll see you again here next Friday at 8 p.m. Good night.